Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Inspired in Berlin podcast. My guest today is Claus Hoefele. Klaus worked for many years as a software engineer in Japan, Australia, and Germany. He's currently the head of engineering at Doctari, where he supports cross-functional teams that match doctors and nurses with the right place to work. Klaus and I met at HERE while working on HERE Technologies consumer products, and since then we have gone on to have slightly different career paths. Klaus, welcome to the show.
Hey Balach, great to see you.
So, as I've been following you on LinkedIn and seeing the various content that you've been posting, I see more and more your growth as an engineering leader. And the content you posted has been so interesting, obviously, that I would have wanted you to be on this show, and I'm happy that we made it. Let's start with asking a very simple question. What made you become a software engineer?
Right. Yeah, so maybe circling back to what you mentioned, that we worked together at HERE Technologies, and I think when we met there, it was a kind of inflection point, right? Like that was kind of the job where I transitioned from a software engineer to an engineering leader, or I decided to take this career path. And yeah, of course, I've been a software engineer, and I've always been like interested from a very young age into, I don't know, how to disassemble things, how to write software. I played a lot with electronics, so naturally some interest in that area developed. And yeah, you mentioned a couple of countries that I worked in. So I worked on kind of mobile phones in Japan, and PlayStation and console games in Australia, and a lot of iPhone and iOS apps, of course, when we met, and also in different companies. And so that's my software engineering and technical background. And so bit by bit, I kind of grew from a software engineer, maybe to a senior engineer, to a lead engineer, to a team lead, to an engineering manager, and now I'm a head of engineering. And as I mentioned, HERE Technologies was kind of the inflection point where I kind of dipped my toes into team management and what that means and what leadership could be. And at that point, I was still kind of having one leg in one place and another leg in another place, and trying it out, doing it parallel, and soon realized that it's kind of two different career paths, right? And there are so many facets to both careers that you can't really do both at the same time, and then decided to move on to focus more on engineering leadership.
Was it a conscious choice for you to focus more on engineering leadership?
I think maybe initially the draw was, of course, maybe I don't dare to say, but maybe to have a bit more say in how things are running. And I think it was not so much a conscious choice in the sense that I wanted to do engineering management exclusively from the beginning. It was more like, that sounds interesting. Let's try this out and see how it goes. And I can still be technical. So I thought at the time, right? And then, but a few years into this job, I realized how complex that can be and how interesting it is. And then it was like, from then on, I'm investing much more time in reading about leadership and learning about leadership topics.
Sweet. So we're going to come back to leadership in a second. Now at HERE already, you had a stellar reputation as a great engineer. I'm sure you felt it and your teammates felt it. That's how I knew it, because I was in a different team. What is the difference between a great engineer and a great engineering team?
Mm-hmm. I think a great engineer probably, engineers are makers, right? Designers are makers, or they are really hands-on creating the product, right? And I think, of course, you develop a certain skill and an experience on understanding, how things could be developed so they work well and, can be easy to maintain, and you can develop a lot of features. And I think a crucial aspect is that these days products are so complex that one person cannot do it alone anymore, right? No matter how good you are. Maybe in the beginning, a prototype or something, right? But any complex product needs a team. And That's why I think the stereotype of this lonely software developer in a corner, I think it's not actually happening anymore, because teams are so essential to product development that you wouldn't go anywhere if you wouldn't develop the skills to work in a team. And of course, in the team, you have like certain functions, right? Maybe you have a product manager and designer and quality and engineers, and working together with different personalities. I think that's also what makes teamwork so interesting.
Absolutely. Products are becoming increasingly complex, and it's also a lot of fun to work with other people. Even if you could do it alone, why wouldn't you? So, talking about teams, how do you organize your team?
I think there are many kind of different aspects to it, but at the end of the day, I mean, we worked kind of in similar companies, right, on similar topics, maybe not the same, but in software products for consumers, maybe also for businesses. And of course, a software team, usually what state of the art is a cross-functional team. And I think where this comes from is that, of course, you want to work on certain things in parallel, and you want to organize your teams so they can be as independently as possible. Because if a team constantly needs to check back with someone and ask questions and get direction, I think you're getting nowhere. So really, the key feature for me in a team is that they are autonomous and have little dependencies on other teams or on other services. And this is a bit how I also approach team organization. Like, a team has a certain goal to develop something, to write a service, and what kind of functions do you need to actually achieve this goal, right? And as much as possible, it's not always possible, but as much as possible, you then get the right people together in this team to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key point is forming the team around the goal, right, and having all the right skills in there. Um, so, being an engineering manager, in a way, you get to judge your team and yourself almost on a daily basis, right? Um, what makes the difference between a high-performing team and a not so high-performing team?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it's always about a balance of trust and accountability. I mean, now that many teams and people work remote, I think trust has come to the forefront, of something you need to have in a team, because whoever thought micromanagement would be a good idea, it's not going to work in office, and it doesn't work in remotely, completely breaks in a remote setup. So I think trust is important, that team members and also the manager trusts the people. But there's also, a flip side to trust, which is accountability, in the sense that, I take the responsibility of taking care of something. You can rely on me, and, I'm coming back to you if I'm blocked, or, to report on, what has come out of our agreements, right? And for me, this is kind of the balance that makes these high performance teams, to have this right balance between, I'm going off, we agreed on something, I'm going off to do it, and also, I'm coming back to you and, discussing where we are right now to decide on what's the next step.
Yeah, on the topic of accountability, it's something that I'm deeply interested in, because for me, in a way, it is the core component of a growth mindset, right? Where you take responsibility for yourself, and of course, in collaboration with other people, it becomes highly important. Is that something you can teach people, or how do you foster that in a team setting? Or is it something that you just hire for, and if it fits, it works. If not, you let go?
Yeah, in my opinion, like, I mean, accountability also has a lot to do with proactivity, right? I understand what needs to be done. I'll follow up by myself. I'm proactive about solving solution, growing, and developing products. And my saying is that if you treat people like children, then you don't have to be surprised if you get a kindergarten. And so it's a bit like the environment that also trains people on how to react, right? And if, of course, if you worked for years in an environment that always told you what to do, then suddenly you're kind of trained on this and saying, hey, I don't expect to decide myself. I'm just waiting for something to happen, right? And
Right.
so my experience is that, of course, it's a bit of personality, but more it's determined by the environment, and it's possible to change, but it takes quite a bit of time, because people need to get used to this new environment and these new ways of working.
Hmm. Have you had to face this challenge? And if yes, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when I'm looking at my current teams, there's certainly, let's say, a team that is a bit more proactive, and a team that's a bit maybe more passive. It's also a bit to do on, I think there's a difference between consumer products and maybe business products or internal products for internal stakeholders, right? Like, I think if you work on consumer products, I mean, they're not coming to you to tell you what to do, right? You have to actually reach out proactively. So I think with the consumer product, you kind of expect this kind of ways of working, whereas with the internal, maybe if you have internal stakeholders, you more expect, hey, someone is gathering for us the requirements and telling us what to do. And then, you have to give more and more kind of leeway to people. You have to say, hey, you can't just throw them into the pool and say, hey, from now on, hey, you are going to proactive. You have to, change the environment bit to bit so they can adjust and also take more and more responsibilities. And for me, a key factor in this is to stop talking about features. Hey, we need to deliver X by Y, and instead talking about goals, right? This is the outcome we want to achieve. We want to be quicker in signing up contracts. We want to have more users, right? And with these outcomes, there people developed a natural interest in, I have some ideas, right? I can imagine some solutions, and so bit by bit, kind of they are moving more towards these more proactive ways of working.
Right. So, as a product manager, I'm somebody who's very interested in product goals and outcomes, and whether it's a B2B or a B2C product, you have to be able to formulate those goals, and it relates to the strategy, and we create roadmaps. In fact, I started my company, which is a road mapping software as a service. How do you interface with the product people, and how do you bring those goals or translate those goals into engineering goals? Is that something you do?
No. Yeah, that's always interesting, and I think it's also depends a lot on your ways of working. If you follow Scrum or maybe Kanban, or you have a different kind of setup, but I always felt it to be a little bit strange if there's the product owner and the development team. Like, for me, the team is, both functions together, and that way, kind of there is no translation or interface necessary, because they kind of work on the same thing. Of course, they have different specialties, right? And you have a product specialist, and maybe someone who specializes in what to do and what has the most value, and someone specializing in how to do it. But there is no translation or interface necessary. But it depends a lot of also on the setup. I experienced like product managers and owners that are a bit more strategic, in the sense of they want to be with the customers. They want to, develop the big vision, and hey, team, please, translate that into a product that makes sense. And then I've seen product owners that are very tactical, in the sense of, hey, my life is the backlog, and I know every ticket, and I write every ticket myself, and I move it around. And it's very, maybe also a bit dependent on the personality of the product person. So at the end of the day, both can work. I think it's also a bit setting up the expectations, right? That you make explicit on how you want to work and agree on how you want to work, And I think that's also a way to foster proactivity, right? If you make it explicit that you expect someone to do something, I think it helps to create this sense of that's my job. Let's work on this.
Right. I totally agree with it. I think people working together and having one goal rather than a goal translated into individual KPIs or specific team KPIs already starts to dig at the roots of cross-functional teams. However, I do see this happening quite often, and one particular example comes to my mind. I was working with a company where at some point we started working on creating a roadmap because they had grown organically and they were successful, but they never felt the need to create a roadmap. And when they did, that was for board meetings, and it was a roadmap with a slide with 100 items on it, and you couldn't make head or tail of it. And nobody paid attention. So when we actually started talking about what are the product goals and let's focus the roadmap around that, one of the interesting things that came up was the CPO suggested that we should also have a technology roadmap or a engineering roadmap. And as I dug further, what I realized was that the product person, because they were not technology oriented, they always talked about the features before that. And on the technology side, things like test automation or cloud infrastructure needs, you have monitoring and automatic restarts of certain services. Those were neglected all this time because the product owner did not have that mindset. And there was nobody taking that action on the engineering side. And so they came to the conclusion that we should have two roadmaps. And my reaction was, but it should all be a product roadmap with input from engineering. When I tell you this story, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, definitely. I think, having two separate roadmaps, right? And then maybe even kind of fighting against each other, I think that might not be a good idea. I mean, when you develop a functionality and achieve a goal, I think you always have to factor in certain technical developments and certain technical improvements as well. I mean, I do understand at some point there will also be, especially in the infrastructure part, there will be some stuff that doesn't directly pay into some product features, right? It's very indirect that you have to set up, I don't know, cloud infrastructure that you can then use for product development, right? So there are certain parts that are very technical, but I think maybe 80%, 90% should be factored into the product development. And that's why you have a cross-functional team, right? That you have the aspects of different, you have kind of different points of views, right? That come together to one goal rather than, hey, I'm following this goal and this roadmap and we are following that road and that goal roadmap. I mean, that always causes friction.
Yeah. Have you had to deal with this friction and have you had to educate your counterparts on also things that you would want to do as an engineer or as an engineering team that they just cannot see, but you see them benefiting the product, whether directly or indirectly?
Yeah. I think most product owners that work in teams, in software teams, kind of have an implicit understanding. I mean, maybe they don't exactly know how it works, but they have an understanding that they don't invest in the technology at some point. If the foundation is not here, the house will break down at some point, right? And outside the immediate team, my experience is that it very much depends a bit on the company organization. Sometimes, I mean, we worked at a company that had kind of engineering and product completely separate up to the C-level, right? And then I see maybe some smaller companies, it's more like one CTPO perhaps in a smaller group that kind of is responsible for both, right? And then sometimes it's also maybe people are more like a CTO and also manage product, and maybe sometimes people are more like a product person and also manage technology, right? And so it's quite interesting how things change and the emphasis changes depending on how the organization works. But I think that the key is that product and engineering is kind of the yin and yang of product development, right? Like if you don't, this must be super integrated, because if that doesn't work, it's not gonna happen with your product.
Indeed. So switching a bit to leadership, but before we talk specifically about it, what makes you come alive at work?
What makes me alive at work? I think one part that is super makes me super happy is also kind of achieving something or completing something, right? That, you know, the feeling that you get when, you know, you worked hard for something, it was very difficult, you spent weeks on it, but then it all comes together and you kind of have maybe the first release, or this feature gets rolled out into production. I think this is what I kind of working for, this kind of accomplishment part. And what's really important for me in this sense is also that that people celebrate these accomplishments, right? Like often when I mean, usually it's a high pressure job, you know, it's always too few features, too few releases, you know, too few this and that. And I think also taking the time to say, hey, now we actually made a step and this step was great, you know, that's creating a warm glow, I think, also for a lot of people, and especially people like we who kind of really enjoy this achievement, accomplishment part of work.
Would it be right to say that you are more of a hands-on engineering manager as compared to somebody who's only managing people?
Not anymore, I would say, because I think the risk when you come from a engineering background is that you think, hey, you know a lot of things, and that's how things need to get done, and then you get into micromanagement. I think that's a risk, but soon you realize that, you know, you are not up to date anymore. I mean, you keep in touch with technology, right, but not on a detailed level. And you soon don't know the exact details anymore. You also maybe manage functions where you don't have a background in. For example, I'm from mobile app development, but I also manage teams that work on back office systems or on back end and infrastructure services, right? So you cannot be, and I don't really want to be anymore, the specialist for everything. And I see myself more as a facilitator, kind of helping people to make the right choices, the right decision, making sure that we consider the context and you know, all factors that go into this decision. But I don't need to be the specialist anymore and you know, knowing everything. So I think I developed an approach where I'm still understand the problem, but I'm not involved in more at all in actually solving the problem. I'm more involved in finding solutions and facilitating decisions.
Right. So you already answered part of my next question. So being an expert or a domain expert is not necessarily part of the skill set of a leader. But what other skills do you use or are you developing to do well at your job and to serve your teams best?
Yeah, I think the background in technology is helpful for me in the way that it supports me understanding the problem. So if people say, I'm not getting any further, that I can dig deeper and understand, hey, can you show me where you get stuck? And then develop kind of support or solutions that unblock people, right? So because I've seen a lot of things and I can understand what's happening. And this is maybe where the technical part helps me, but of course it's also you know, about maybe managing conflict, giving people feedback. And what at the end of the day also ends up on my plate a lot is like, we mentioned how teams should be autonomous, but there's also always some dependencies between, right? So between the gaps or maybe support structures that are common between teams, that's a bit more my domain, where I can also be a bit more closer than the day-to-day proceedings in the team itself.
Right. Um, the other part of the question, in a way, we are already touching on this, right? So you have certain skills where you have deep expertise or prior experience, and then there's all these adjacent skills you need. So conflict resolution or management, feedback culture, etc. Are these things that you also try to encourage within your team? Are you helping them upskill in some way?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this changed over the last few years as well, because I used to be an engineer manager and then mostly responsible in supporting one team, right? And now as head of engineering, this role changes again because you're responsible in supporting multiple teams, right? And usually each team has a tech lead or a team lead of some sort. And this is something super interesting, what I kind of tried to learn a bit more about in the last 2 years. How can you teach leadership? What are the aspects and what kind of formats are helpful for people to gain their understanding of leadership? I mean, coaching and mentoring is a lot part of it, like in one-on-ones, but I've also been interested in what kind of internal workshops or maybe even classes can you develop to teach certain aspects of leadership. For example, what I've done is hiring is of course always a huge part in any tech organization. And I've developed a workshop and a kind of a setup that worked for me. And I'm now kind of teaching that internally, let's do a workshop together. I show you what's important. And let's then develop a custom hiring pipeline, for your team. And then use that to be really good at hiring.
Right. What other activities are you doing or promoting within your teams? Now I'm thinking, and you mentioned achievement and recognition earlier. Is there some specific format to that, or hackathons, or other team events?
Yeah. I mean, hackathons are cool. I sometimes feel maybe they shouldn't be kind of I think product should be or working at your company should be fun, right? So it shouldn't be hey, our work is really hard, and by the way, we do hackathons, and that's the fun part, right? So I'm focusing a bit more on creating a fun environment or an interesting environment. And again, for me, I mean, there are different personalities, right? For me, there is this product vision, these goals, these achievements is very important. That's a bit what I'm focused on. But I also totally understand that other people, they say, hey, we are motivated by, learning cool technology, or we are motivated by, doing something together in a weekend. And that, motivation works differently for different people, and you have to make different offers in terms of motivation to different people. And does that answer your question? That was kind of part of it, right?
Yeah, more or less. One of the reasons I ask this question often is I'm always interested in also how concretely people are doing different things. And particularly the topic of hackathons was interesting because I was talking to the company that I'm consulting with, and we were talking about hackathons and how to organize them, that it doesn't become exactly this thing of that is the only fun part, and then the rest is drudgery. And in fact, I've experimented with hackathons with product managers as well. So it's been some of these specific practices, feedback rounds or particular team events tend to help quite a bit. So feel free to throw those in if more examples come to your mind as well. I want to switch also to behavior change. Now, you have been interested in behavior change. I'm not going to say anything else. I'll let you talk about how that started and what comes up within that.
Yeah, I think that connects back a little bit to what I mentioned about teaching maybe others how leadership works. And I've realized that a previous focus for me in learning was always about knowledge. Read a book and go through a training and build knowledge. But I think what learning actually is about, it's a combination of knowledge and also changing your behavior. By changing your behavior, that's how you kind of prove that you kind of, understood it and can actually use it day to day, right? And I'm always trying to put these two things together, right? Like hiring, yes, you need to have the knowledge on what is the best approach or what would I recommend. But then you also need to develop the habits of, for example, putting feedback always in the ATS, right? So that that HR is always up to date on what's with the candidate, or create the habit of, asking, actually having good criteria and actually asking for those criteria in the interviews so you can give feedback to candidates, right? And that's why I'm interested in this behavior change and habit formation, because this is really where kind of, the practical implementations of knowledge is happening. And with this way, I've came in touch with a particular kind of brand or book called Tiny Habits. And I've been trained in this method, which I found a really pragmatic way to kind of change habits and set up habits. And that's a bit what I'm using in my approach and also in my workshops and trainings.
Sweet. So talking about tiny habits, what habits are you changing or have changed in the past few years?
So pretty much every time I learn something new, I try to set up a habit and then see how that develops, if I can actually turn this behavior into a habit. For example, simple things, right? I read about a communication method. If someone comes to you and talks to you about something great that happened in their life, how do you respond? And it turns out that maybe there are some better ways and some worse ways to answer, and maybe some worse ways would be, hey, great that you had this achievement. By the way, I also had another achievement that I'm talking about, right? So kind of deflecting from that person's great news. And a good way or better way to respond would be to ask more questions, to be interested in how they actually achieved this accomplishment. And that way you kind of build relationships, right? If you come to me and say, oh, I made a new release of my product, I'm so proud that I found this company. And then I ask you a question, I'm really interested in your learning, how do I find a company? How does it work actually? Where do you get the funding from? Or was it really hard? And then suddenly we build a relationship. So I formed the habit of, after I hear something good, I ask, tell me more about it. So every time someone in a daily says something good, maybe I kind of encourage them to talk more about it. Mm-hmm. And that's one example how this works. And another example might be, I'm reading currently about resilience and optimism, because we seem to get from one crisis to the next crisis, right? Like climate crisis, Corona, Ukraine, war in Ukraine. And I think resilience and optimism, to keep optimistic despite all these bad things happening, is I think critical also to your mental health. Mm-hmm. And I'm going through a training in Coursera about positive psychology, and they are teaching certain methods of what would work on resilience. And then kind of I assembled kind of a habit recipe, I call it. If you always think about, one person is guilty or one organization is guilty, then I'm reading a bit more about the background and develop different perspectives, right? So I kind of set up different habit recipes that help me, reconsider what they call thinking traps, that you think, hey, you are always the problem, or I'm always the problem, or, everything will be destroyed, or I can nothing to do about it. That's kind of certain thinking traps that keep you pessimistic, but to keep you optimistic, there are also strategy to help, understand what you could do about it, and then building different habit recipes, to keep you going.
Right. I want to come back to resilience and positive psychology in a bit. You gave a great example how to deal with positive news. How about bad news? How do you deal with a situation when somebody comes to you and they are distraught and in a difficult situation or something terrible happened to them?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure I found a perfect answer yet, but I think there's a balance to do, because on the one hand you want to console that person and also, make them feel heard. At the same time, if someone has a negative experience, and reliving that negative experience can sometimes, strengthens the feeling or make the feeling worse, right? And as I said, I'm not sure I have a good answer to this, but I'm trying to be a bit intuitive about, what that person needs. Do they, just let off steam perhaps? Do they maybe need to reflect on this, on how this happened? Or maybe, are they quiet right now or don't want to talk about this right now, and maybe I can pick this up a bit later. So I'm not sure I have a good approach to this, but in this case, I think you have to listen a bit to your intuition, what might be the best approach.
Fair enough. And what you're saying kind of points also to emotional intelligence, right? To be able to modulate your responses according to the situation. Is that something that you're consciously cultivating in yourself, or do you have anything to say about emotional intelligence?
Yeah. I mean that's an amazing approach, and I think it's kind of been proven that it's very necessary if you get to a certain skill level, that to develop further, you need to develop emotional intelligence. It's totally teachable, right, and learnable, to some degree. And I think the way I think about emotional intelligence, that is kind of first of all, it's about self-management, right? Like you need to understand your feelings and how not to control them or suppress them, but how to deal with feelings. At the end of the day, feelings are signals that tell you something, something is off or something is good, and how you have a choice on how to react on them, right? If you are trained in kind of monitoring your feelings. And then, of course, it's also about empathy. How do you receive feelings from others? How do you understand the feeling in others? How they, from their perspective, how they feel? And then it's maybe to have the kind of skills to kind of bring this together in a communication or in a discussion, right? That you understand yourself, you understand the other, and also how do I build a relationship out of this and something positive and good. And yeah, it's probably something you never stop learning, but it's certainly interesting also to spend quite a bit of time on this part of emotional intelligence.
Mm. Now, these are topics that that a lot of us, let's say, become aware of through painful experiences, right? Oftentimes we go through life without knowing much about it and repeating our own behavior patterns driven by our mental models, and something happens and kicks us into awareness, sort of. How did you come to this? Were you always this kind of a person? Were you always interested in how do I deal with people, and started picking up these skills, or did something happen?
I don't think something particular happened, but I think it's fairly natural progression that if you work with a lot of people in a leadership role, that you develop a natural interest in psychology, because at the end of the day, that's what you're working with, right? Psychology of humans. And it's nothing big happened, but over time, kind of an interest in this kind of developed. And then I'm reading more and more about these topics and less about technology topics, or even though I'm, of course, keeping up to date with it. But that's a bit how, I got in this behavior change kind of topic. We mentioned positive psychology. I've done recently a very interesting mental health first aid class, where it's also a bit, about people might have mental crises, how you can maybe help until, a professional arrives, this sort of thing. And there's so many interesting topics to learn about human behavior. It's it's kind of a never ending stream of interesting things.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy to hear that you're spending so much time and investing so much in your development. I think that is something often goes missing in workplaces. If the individual themselves is not taking that initiative, often we hire somebody and we just assume that they're going to stay that good for the rest of their lives. Are you also encouraging this for your teams or offering these kind of things to your teams?
No. I think I wish I could, like, for me, the best setup in a company is if you have a budget where, hey, this is X amount of money, please spend it on yourself to buy books, trainings, get into coaching or whatever. I think at the moment I can't offer this kind of setup, but that would be for me kind of ideal because, it helps people be proactive, and because people need to understand it's actually their career, right? I mean, a company and a leader has to set up the environment so they can develop themselves, but it's not a company's responsibility to build your career. It's your career, right? And and I think with a certain liberty and freedom also comes, trying out things. I think I certainly wouldn't have done a few things if if I didn't have the means of just trying out if I like a few things or if that training is helping me, right? And so you develop or push a bit the boundaries of what you already know. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's go back to resilience. What is it and how do I develop it?
Yeah. So resilience, I guess you could say it's bouncing back from a bad situation, right? Like we cannot always prevent from, let's say, an accident happens or a war happens. We cannot always change these situations, but if they happen to us, how do we kind of bounce back to be optimistic or to be positive in our life? And the course I'm taking, what they are talking about are these kind of 5 thinking traps. I hope I can remember all of them. That always they are the sole responsibility for this problem. I'm the sole responsibility for this problem. I'm totally helpless. There's nothing I can do about it. And there were 2 more thinking traps that I unfortunately forgot. But this is a bit like, being aware of these kind of thinking traps that they could happen. It's basically also kind of bias, right? That you maybe think catastrophizing is another thinking trap, that you think, things are actually worse than they really are. And if you're aware of them, maybe you catch yourself doing them, and then you can actually work on some strategies to work towards positive change. For example, you can say, hey, give an example. Let's say I'm helpful. I can do nothing about the war in Ukraine. And think about, actually, there are examples where I can do something, donate money or donate clothes or help people get a new job or house people for a short term of time, right? So, and then suddenly, actually, I can do something about it. I can't change everything, but I can do some parts of it. Or making yourself a plan on, for example, with catastrophizing, everything will be, there's violence everywhere, or things will be really bad and everything is bad. And you're saying, no, I'm actually finding examples where maybe something could happen to me. So the wonderful Balach invited me in his podcast, right? And then saying, maybe not everything is bad. And of course, it's not about negating the bad things that are happening, because they are bad, and you also have to acknowledge this. But it's also to keep a balance and to also say, okay, despite all these bad things happening, I'm actually having also a few good things that keep me in a balanced mental state.
Thank you. Those were some great examples. What I understood, especially from the first 3 as well as the 4th mental trap, it very much sounds like black and white thinking, right? It's either my fault or completely yours. Either I can solve this problem or nothing can be done. And sometimes I see that at work as well. Oftentimes people would bring opinions, on all levels. Either we do this thing, we launch this app, or nothing. Either we have test automation or nothing. Either we fix this bug or we don't fix any. And there's often a lot of this one way or single story way of thinking. And I think what you're saying is starting to take perspective or being able to take perspective and not negating if there is something bad, but being able to work with it is the way to go. How do you practice this? Is it something that you kind of, as you're doing this course, I'm assuming you're not going to wait for the next catastrophe to happen where you then pull out the book and practice this. Is this something that you do on a daily basis? Do you practice mindfulness, or what goes into that?
Yeah, I mean, part of this tiny habits method is that you create certain habit recipes that you then have available to you, when you need them. So unfortunately, we have a lot of crises going on at the moment. I mean, a habit is also a behavior that happens regularly, right? If it only happens 1 year, it's probably not a habit. It's more like, day to day. But then, for example, like doom scrolling, like going through your Twitter feed and seeing a lot of negative messages, you can set up yourself a habit, to kind of reconsider after a while. Hey, I'm scrolling maybe 5 minutes. Afterwards, I'm thinking about if I want to continue, right? And these kind of habit recipes you have maybe available because you set it up to yourself, and that kind of helps you practice this when they happen. And coming back maybe to what you said about this black and white thinking is, I think people underestimate that small changes lead to big changes. So usually there is kind of this thinking. Maybe a simple example about test automation, unless we have like hundreds of tests, this is totally useless, so I'm not even starting to write the first test. But actually you should say, let's write a simple test and maybe just have one test, but then, this quarter, but then we actually have one. And people are sometimes, making too big steps, and that stops them from starting. And I find this can be so relieving to say, hey, I make a small step and that's fine and that's totally good. And then suddenly you see, actually can a second small step, and bit by bit you kind of change the situation.
I absolutely agree. One of my most favorite sentences these days is between 0 and 100 is 99 steps, and we need to take them one at a time. So thank you for sharing that. Now, talking about positive psychology, so other than the habits, how much of a role does positive psychology play in all of this, or do you make it also part of the tiny habits?
Yeah, so I think tiny habits and positive psychology are related in the sense that kind of to build a behavior into a habit, you celebrate your behavior, and that's kind of what keeps it going, and yourself remembering to do the behavior again and again. And positive psychology, what this is about is the realization that even if you solve all the problems, let's say you have no illness whatsoever, it still is not a guarantee that you feel great. Like, taking away problems brings you kind of to a neutral state. But to make you feel great, there is something positive that needs to be there as well. And I think that's very different to my experience in companies. Because always like feedback and performance review and product discussion is always, what problems are we solving? This failed, so we need to be better. And there's always kind of the focus on the negative. And what I really like about the idea of psychology is that it's actually turning this around and saying, hey, what is actually working well? Can we do more of this? And people, what are your strengths? Can we actually use your strengths in a better way, right? And this is a much more positive, optimistic outlook on things, and something I also have been missing for a while, because as I said before, right? If you solve all the problems also in your life, it still doesn't mean you feel super happy and great. And there was always something missing, and positive psychology kind of gave me a bit of a clue what that could be.
So on a group level, celebrating and rewarding oneself, that would apply on an individual level as well. How much role does gratitude play in this? Because I've been hearing a lot about it, and I've read a fair bit about kind of keeping a journal and this habit of 3 things I'm grateful for today tends to make a difference. Is that something you practice, or is it part of the story somewhere here?
Yeah, that's kind of a well-known maybe intervention. What they call this, right? That before you go to bed, you reflect on your day and write down 3 things that went well that day. And it's kind of proven, like in a scientific sense, that people who do this kind of really improve their mental health and feel much better, right? And this is also a bit the part about positive psychology that I really like, is that it's usually, or it's nearly always evidence-based, right? They actually do tests with people to actually do this behavior and then see, does it make a difference to people who don't do this behavior, right? So it's kind of a scientific method to it. And for example, one behavior that is also mentioned in this Tiny Habits book is that after I put my feet on the floor, I say, this is going to be a great day. And they call it the Maui happy. Maybe in Maui they're all super happy or so. But this is also a fantastic way, a kind of mindfulness approach, to say, yes, this is going to be a great day. And maybe this is always helping you to actually make this happen as well.
Yeah, it's amazing how we can prime ourselves, right? Because in a way we are always thinking, and if you're always thinking negatively, of course that hurts and has impact. And a bit of that positive thinking, even if it feels fake in the beginning, starts to change how you think for the rest of the day.
And I want to emphasize that it's really not about negating negative things, because you have to acknowledge them, right? It's really not about this, but you can change, you can change how you react on things, and also keeping a certain balance between positivity and negativity. I think I once read that something negative that happens to you is I think 5 to 7 times stronger than something positive. Like, you remember it more easily. That's the way kind of people are wired up. So to keep a balance, we have to put a bit of focus on positivity to keep that in check.
Yeah, that's an important point, right? So we are hardwired to spot danger, and danger in the modern life is more about I'm going to miss my flight, or I'm not going to find parking, or my proposal will be met with rejection at the meeting. And of course, those things last a lot longer in our memory. And I think the corollary to this thing, that negative events are 5 to 7 times more likely to be remembered. And also have that proportional impact in terms of their length of staying with us. There was something that in order to cancel out a negative experience in a product, you need about 13 positive experiences. And that is crazy. But it all goes back to how we are hardwired to be. So we are kind of coming towards the close of the podcast, and I want to notice that we talked about so many different skills as a leader, how you work with people, the feedback loops and positive psychology, and all the things that we mentioned. Almost nothing has to do directly with engineering. And it's fascinating to see that in a way, when you get to the leadership roles, it becomes all about people. Yeah. Would that be a good way to think about this?
Yeah. I mean, of course, there is always, I think, let's put it this way, there's always too much of a focus on product and technology and too little on people. And I think that's why I'm investing more and more on the people side to kind of, balance this off. And what you're saying is true, right? Like on the higher up the leadership levels you go, the more you actually, it's actually important how you work with people and how you can build relationships. That's more important.
And of course, the assumption is that you have experts who are already experts. So it's not about teaching them how to do their job, but to facilitate.
Yeah.
Cool. So at the end of the podcast, last question. If you had a giant billboard and millions of people would walk past it, what would you write on it?
Ooh. What would I write on it? I think I would maybe ask the question like, what was good in your day, right? Like, I think we talked a lot about how usually everything is focused on the negative part, and there are so many crises, and I think really pushing this idea of, there are good things happening, even if they are small, and keep people on saying, hey, I'm reflecting on today, and maybe there was something good that I really enjoyed, and keep that in memory. So yeah, what was good in your day?
Perfect. Thank you for that, Klaus, and thank you for this wonderful hour with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a joy to talk to you. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Ciao, everybody.